Hello and welcome to First Case. I'm Melanie Perry and I am going to be your host for our interview today. And you know, so many of you have messaged me, you've reached out to me, you've stopped me at AORN Expo and said, hey, why aren't you talking about the charge nurse role? What information do you have out there about what it's like to be an OR charge nurse? And I listened, I heard you, and I want to cover this topic. It is actually a topic that is very near and dear to me because I was pretty much thrust into this role very early in my OR career. And I know that it can be overwhelming and challenging, but it can also be very rewarding too. And so we are going to have that conversation today, and we are talking all things OR charge nurse. I have brought in 3 different OR charge nurses from 3 very different types of facilities to help us have a roundtable panel discussion about the charge nurse role. We're going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. And we all know that we can experience all those 3 things all in one day, maybe even all in 1 hour, if we're being really honest. So if you're in the charge nurse role yourself, then you really do know that sometimes we can experience all of these different things. But before I have this whole conversation all by myself, let me introduce you to today's panelists. Joining me today is 𝗲𝗵𝗂𝘀𝗀 from an ASC in Austin, Texas. I have Andrew Withrow joining us from an academic medical center in Tennessee, and Carlos Dillard joining us from a critical access hospital in Alabama. So all of you, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having us.
I am so excited to have this conversation today. So why don't we get started and just tell everybody, introduce yourselves to the audience. Lisa, we'll let ladies go first. So why don't you go ahead and just give everybody a little bit of introduction about you.
Thank you, Melanie. My name is 𝗲𝗵𝗂𝘀𝘀, and I am from Central Texas, Austin to be specific. I have a background. I have come from a level 1 trauma center and currently in the ASC space as a charge nurse. And so I kind of have a perspective from both sides of it. So I just, I'm excited about this interview and sharing my experiences and listening to my colleagues here and their experiences as well. So thank you again for having me.
Absolutely. All right, Andrew, how about you?
Hi, I'm Andrew Withrow. I am originally from Charleston, West Virginia. I've been in Tennessee for about 9 years, the whole time at the same facility. I've always worked in larger academic medical centers, mostly level 1 trauma centers. It's where I've spent most of my career, primarily in the cardiac OR space. I did that for about 18 years as a first assistant for 12 years. Got a little bit burnt out with that and recently transitioned to a charge nurse role. We started that in February, and I have some previous leadership experience, which has come in pretty handy. I've managed cardiac surgery service line before, vascular surgery, thoracic, and served as a frontline clinical leader as well.
Awesome. You bring a lot of experience to the table as well. I mean, all of you do. That's why I chose you and asked to interview you. And Carlos, you are rounding out the trio of experts here. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello, I'm Carlos. I'm from Alabama, a little central town, small town in central Alabama. I've been a nurse 15 years now, worked med-surg for 5 of those years, been in surgery for 10 years, been a charge nurse for 8.5 of those years. Before that, I was in the military, Marine Corps, did a little bit of aviation, had a lot of leadership experience, but nothing prepared me for being a charge.
I think that's probably the best segue that we could have into this discussion. But first, Carlos, thank you for your service. Thank you for your commitment and sacrifice for our country and for the service that you did in the Marines. I know we're all appreciative and grateful. And as we move through this conversation, I'm going to turn the tables and actually come back to you, Carlos. And curious, you are in a critical access hospital in Alabama, rural health at its finest.
Yes.
How would you describe the charge nurse role in your facility?
It's challenging. It's hard to find nurses in our small town. There's a lot of facilities all around us. Maybe you go 50, 90 miles, and a lot of people choose to drive other places. So we had to deal with lack of staff, Um, and basically supply issues, issues with equipment, not enough money, because most of our 90% of our patients are Medicaid, Medicare. So we do have that issue. So there is always a challenge. We have, luckily I work with a great director that's kind of bringing other service lines. We're starting to pick up, as Melanie can attest. We had a crazy day on Friday. Most cases that we've done probably about 7-8 years. So it's a challenge. That's all I can say. It's a challenge. There's things that other people mentioned that I wish we had. Staff that people mention they have that I wish I had. So there are days when there are just 4 of us and we have to make it work, and we have 3 doctors working, and the charge nurse is working right along with it.
Yep, you are. It's just let this cat out of the bag. Carlos and I do work together. I work PRN at the facility where Carlos is in charge. And so when we were lining up guests for this conversation, I'm like, Carlos, we got to talk to you. We got to talk about the rural health side of being in charge and the hospitals and what it's like outside of those big academic medical centers, or even the big cities, and where you have all the different options for healthcare. And one thing that you said, you talked about, not having staffing or people choosing to go elsewhere. It's not just staff who choose to go elsewhere. It's the patients too. The patients who can, yes. The patients who have the ability will drive 60 miles, 90 miles and go to the bigger cities to go have their surgery or have their healthcare. And so what we are left with is the sickest of the sick, and a different demographic that does make it challenging when you are trying to manage care and manage your patients, and also have staff for those cases, because the staff choose to go elsewhere, and so do our patients. But yeah, so it is an interesting setup in the rural healthcare for sure. And Andrew, we're going to switch gears now to a larger town and a much larger facility. What is it like now that you are in charge? What is the role like where you are?
It's crazy most days. We have anywhere between, I would say, 120 cases to 150, 60, 70 cases a day.
Wow.
Across all of our ORs. The charge nurse role is a little bit different, I think, than what most people would expect at our facility. As a charge nurse, I'm really I'm managing the operations for the day. Mm-hmm. We have frontline leaders that really manage the more intricate details of the clinical portion and have direct supervision of the staff, whereas my role is to troubleshoot operational things that come up during the day. The biggest part of the role is to make sure that the OR remains efficient, that we're moving cases in a way that's going to get things done, to place cases that don't have a home yet, trying to figure out where we're going to get these cases done. Any day that we walk in, we may have a full OR schedule, but we still have 10 to 12 cases to get done somewhere that have to be done before we can leave.
Yeah.
And so my job primarily is to manage the operations for the main OR, which is 41 ORs. We also have some operational responsibility for a smaller, what we would say is outpatient surgery. Not always, but mostly outpatient surgery. That's 11 ORs, 12 GYN ORs, and then, I'm sorry, did I say 12? 4.
Okay.
4 GYN ORs and 4 plastic surgery ORs. A lot of our outpatient surgery has been moved offsite, which is nice. It's helped us to offload some of that case volume, but also has given us more capacity to do all of the other things that we do. And it's every service line: cardiac, neuro, ortho, general, gen onc, like I said, plastics, GYN. Really every service line you can think of, we do. A large part of our job is managing transplants, figuring out, coordinating with UNOS and with our transplant coordinators, when is this transplant going to go? And also our donors, how we're going to find time to schedule these procurements. And so also being in a level 1 trauma center, you think you have your day planned out, a perfect day.
Just kidding. You never do.
You have a level 1 and just disrupts your entire schedule. And you have to, move all the Tetris pieces, as we call it, to keep the OR running. to get these patients in an efficient manner, get them done, and just try to give everyone the best care they can have that day. And some days it's more challenging than others, but it's always rewarding at the end of the day when you're able to take care of all of your patients and take care of your staff by getting them home on time. So,
absolutely. And your staff loves you when that happens, right?
you know, I would love to say that the staff love us, but I think more often than not, the staff don't appreciate all of the intricacies of what we do every day. Yeah.
No. The staff cares about going home on time, and they, getting lunch breaks and what they see for sure when they know that they have what they need, but they don't fully see everything that goes on behind the scenes. So for those of you watching who are in a staff nurse position, you're going to see behind the curtain today of what goes on and everything that is being juggled in that charge nurse role. And Lisa, I know that you have experience at a level 1 trauma center, and now you're at an ASC. What's it like in your role?
It's a combination of what you just heard, actually.
Yeah.
Coming from a level 1 trauma center, the charge nurse was very much like Andrew's. And they were more focused. We had one that was focused on the operations, the maintenance, the quality, if you want to call it that, of the equipment, the making sure that supplies were there. But on the other hand, there were other charge nurses that were more like service leads, and they were responsible just for that service line. So if it was plastics, we want to make sure we have implants for, those augmentations. And if it was ortho, make sure those implants were there in place. And coming to a surgery center, it's all of that in one package. You're that one person that takes care of everything. The surgery, the level 1 trauma center that I came from was very similar to what he described. And again, you come in thinking you know what your day is going to be like, and it's completely the opposite. And I did spend some time in the charge nurse role in the evening. And you had mentioned offline a while ago about staff not appreciating you being able to get them out on time. And when you don't have another shift coming in, or that next shift is limited, sometimes I found myself jumping in that role to get that staff member out, to keep them from being in overtime, or just to keep them happy. In the ASC world, it's very similar, but on a downward scale. We have 11 ORs. Majority of our cases are cataracts. A lot of ENT, some oculoplastics, some colorectal, GYN, heavy in the GYN, and also endoscopes. And so it's very much the same. We don't have that 3 o'clock shift that comes in. And so we try to condense the schedule. If there's room in the schedule to move this case over to another space and get it done in a timely manner, then we work with our anesthesia leaders, and we're the ones running the board and making those decisions with them. And it's just to be more efficient. Everybody says, "Oh, we got an add-on." No, we don't want to do that. Well, and I know
you got to
heard that, but we've got to.
Yeah.
And I've always said, if it wasn't for the patients, we wouldn't have a job. And so we need to do our due diligence and take the best care we can, no matter what space we're in. Take the best care we can, and whatever that means.
All right. No, absolutely. All of you have such varied experience and different places that you're working, but kind of to tie into what Lisa said, every one of us, no matter what facility we're in, if it wasn't for our patients, we wouldn't have a job. And we are there to facilitate safe patient care for every patient who is wheeled into our operating rooms, no matter what their case, if it's an emergent case, if it's an elective case, if it's who knows what, we're going to do it, and we're going to take care of them. And that is something that should always stay at the forefront of all of our minds, no matter what position we are filling within our operating rooms. And I am curious, because all of your roles come with unique challenges. I actually in the academic medical center where I worked, I was that service line coordinator. I was the orthopedic team leader that Andrew and Lisa were working with, trying to make sure that my service line ran smoothly. I feel like Carlos wears every single hat because we don't have service line coordinators. We have Carlos, and Carlos knows and does everything. More so, I think he has more on his plate than he should at times, but it's just a small facility. Let Carlos do it, right? But all of these roles they come up and somebody needs to fill it. And so you step into leadership. You mentioned a little bit, Andrew, about what brought you coming up into a charge nurse role, but how did is there anything else you want to add for like what made you decide to take on this charge nurse role of 44 ORs? 41 ORs. Yeah. What made you decide to get into that leadership role?
I was really ready for a change in my career. I had always been very focused in cardiac surgery. I was getting a little bit burnt out with cardiac surgery. And then, the great thing about being a nurse and even an OR nurse where, people think that we're very pigeonholed into what we do, but there's so many different things you can do, different avenues that you can explore. And so this job became available. I had a good background for it. I already had leadership experience. I applied for it, interviewed, and was lucky enough to get it. It's been a wonderful break for me. I really enjoy the work that I do, and it's just been a really good change of pace.
That's awesome. That's good to hear. I'm curious, do you ever just come home with a splitting headache because you feel like you were just juggling, burning chainsaws all day long and it never stopped? I mean, that's kind of how I would feel sometimes when I ran the board.
I mean, if I'm going to be super honest, I haven't had a day yet that has been as stressful as being an assistant in cardiac surgery. If I'm going to be 100% honest, I haven't had a day quite that stressful as a charge nurse yet. I'm not saying it's not around the corner. It could be.
You know what, though? Perspective is a valuable thing because I worked in med-surg before I worked in the operating room, and there is not a single day in the operating room that was ever as bad as working in med-surg. So I don't really have a lot to complain about. So it's just kind of what happens and how it goes.
I worked for 1 year in the emergency room at a level 1 trauma center at night. And so you're right. I mean, it gives you some perspective about, what are some of those other things I could be doing and how lucky I am to be in the space that I'm at, right
Absolutely.
now.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Lisa, how about you? What made you decide to get into this role?
Well, I don't know that I decided. I think I was just kind of pushed into it.
You had a pulse and you were available.
Yeah, pretty much. No, I transitioned from the level 1 to the ASC, and I was simply looking for a staff nurse role. I had been in education for peri-op. I had been in the leadership role for several years, and I was just looking for a change and wanted to get back to, my roots, so to speak. Being at the bedside, I like being at the bedside, and I just feel like my purpose is there, and helping my colleagues at the hip. We work together, and then this just came available, and it just felt like the right thing to do. And I just stepped up. There was nobody else stepping up, so it just felt right.
Yeah. And sometimes that's just what happens. There is a need, and that you can meet the need, and you're the right person at the right time.
Right.
Carlos, I actually don't know the answer to this one. And so I'm curious to hear, how did you end up in charge? Tell the story, please.
Okay. So I came from med-surg, had been a med-surg nurse, like I said, 5 years. And so I moved to the OR. The OR director at the time kind of begged me. She begged me for months. Said, please come to the OR. She said, I need you. I love how you work. Your patients love you. Can you come down to the OR? So I came to the OR, and I was burnt out myself. I had been a charge nurse for probably about 3 years on the floor. I said, I never want to be a charge nurse again.
Oh, famous last words.
She said, I can almost guarantee it because there are like 3 or 4 people in charge in front of you. I said, sure. So I came down, worked there a year. The first charge nurse left. Somebody else took the position, A few years later, I was in charge. I turned around like 3 years in OR, and I was like, where did everybody go? Now I'm in charge, completely in charge. And that's how I ended up as the charge nurse. Nobody else there could do it. I mean, I was the most senior nurse. I turned around. Every time somebody would come in that was experienced, they would leave. And it's like, wow, how did I end up with this? And every day when I consider somebody say, well, maybe somebody else would be the charge nurse. Everybody says, I do not want the job that you do because it's just too hard to try to manage everything. You wear so many hats.
Yeah.
There's days when I go home and my wife laughs. She says, because she works with us, she's in recovery room. She said, I just hear your name all day long. Carlos, Carlos, Carlos. I can be in a case with another doctor, and the doctor wants to see me in his room. So I have to get somebody to come in to relieve me so I can go check on that doctor.
Oh,
so
yeah, your name is called all the time. But okay, so that actually leads up to a different question. It's not a prepared question on our outline ahead of time, but I am curious for each of you, because as nurses who are in charge, at the end of the day, we are still capable and able, and anytime necessary, willing to go into patient rooms, care for our patients, and take over if we need to. And we can circulate, some of us can scrub, whatever we need to do. If the case needs it, we jump in and do it. But like you just said, Carlos, that doesn't relieve us of that hat of being the person in charge. So how do you still provide the care that your patient needs while juggling the distractions and the chaos that might be going on around you when people are like, hey, Carlos, I need this. Hey, Carlos, I need that. What do I do? I'm actually curious to hear from all of y'all, if you've experienced that, how you balanced it.
Well, the way I balance it is when I'm in the OR, when I'm circulating or whether I'm scrubbing. That's my focus. Mm-hmm. There's nothing else. I tell people all the time, they'll ask me a question. I say, give me a few minutes at this case, we can talk about it, or if you need something else, go and check with this person. They know exactly what you need. When I'm scrubbing, because I can't scrub out, I can't come and help you. I can't assist you. It's great to have a strong team of nurses. Like I have a strong team of nurses for the most part. There are some people that are newer, but I have people like Melanie. Whenever we're doing ortho, I can say, hey, go see Melanie, go see Liz. If you're doing ortho, if we're doing ENT, I can say, hey, go ask Michael. She's worked with Dr. Guido for several years. If we're doing GYN, I have Michael, I have Lazan. There's so many people that we can utilize because we have to all be versatile where we work at. I can go from, I think we have 6 ORs, 2 endo rooms, and a C-section suite. So we can go from doing a C-section to doing GYN, to doing ENT, to doing general, to doing ortho, to doing vascular, all in a single day. I mean, there's been one time when we actually had, I think it was 5 or 6 specialists in one day. So I had to be able to take that hat off. I always tell people I take my lead hat off and I just kind of put it to the side for a little bit because my patient is the focus. So I had to stay focused on that patient. And everything else would just kind of have to suffer for a little bit. And then once I get out of the room or get out the case, I can kind of smooth things over there.
Yeah, that's a good perspective. I'm curious, Andrew or Lisa, have you ever run into that where you're still in charge, but you're also circulating or scrubbed and you have to balance both of those? How'd you do it?
Absolutely. I'm fortunate that I have a co-charge and also have a manager that are working alongside of me on the floor as well. There for a time, the charge had to be in the room and fill in those gaps like he's talking about when someone calls in. We just are limited on the extra staff that we would have to fill those gaps. And I would do the very same thing. My focus needs to be on that case, on this patient, and the things that are required of that patient in that case and what the doctor's needs are, whether I'm circulating or scrubbing. If I'm circulating, I'm a little more accessible. However, I feel like the focus still needs to be the same. And with those colleagues that, I have that secondary charge or my manager, I could refer to them because we're all on the same page. We all should
Right.
have the same information. But I find that if people are coming to me as a resource, or, if I'm needing to reach out, you can use the resources that you have, such as what Carlos was saying. You've got these people that are more experienced in these certain areas. Use them to answer those questions, or to help you get that task while you're tied up with your patient.
For sure. Andrew, you have anything to add to this? Have you had to experience that since you've been in charge?
So in my role, in theory, I could be put into staffing, but in practicality, that means someone else is going to have to run the board, and they don't want to.
Exactly. Exactly.
There's a very small amount of nurses in our OR that can function in that charge nurse role, and someone always has to be in our what we call the command center. We work out of the command center. So, in our command center, I work in there. I have an MR that works in there, medical receptionist that works in there with me. Also, our anesthesia in charge person, who's our anesthesia attending today, who really manages the anesthesia side of operations for us, work out of that office. And so, for me to go into staffing, someone else would have to come do it.
Right.
So there always has to be a charge nurse in there in case there's a level 1 or there's a stroke call, something emergent that comes up. We have to have someone in there. And so I think, in our department, we have, like I said before, those frontline clinical leaders. And I think that they would probably go into staffing before they would start looking at, putting the charge nurse in staffing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what we did. Yeah.
I've not had to experience that yet. Now we do sometimes. We will leave the board if we have a level 1. Our level 1s are supposed to come to the OR in no more than 15 minutes. So we need that patient in the OR in 15 minutes. And so typically the surgeon or resident will call, board this case, speak to the charge nurse, and then I will go relay information that's pertinent to the team in the OR to them. I might stay in there, to get the patient in onto the bed, and kind of assist, and facilitate that very beginning part of the level 1. But then I need to get back to the board so I can be there for the next level 1. And so, so far I haven't had a situation where I'm in staffing. I know that does differ some for my colleagues who are the charge nurses at night. Every once in a while, they'll have to be in staffing, and it takes a very strong medical receptionist to set up there and know when they need to call a charge nurse and when they can't call a charge nurse, and kind of be able to manage that flow without us there.
Yeah, no, okay. So we just have to take a time out and say a huge shout out to every one of those medical receptionists or secretaries who are sitting at the board with the charge nurses. The ones that I've worked with in the past, they could run the board just as well as everybody else. And any time that I was in the board runner position, because I was orthopedic team leader, so usually I would go into staffing, but I couldn't always scrub the cases that if we were short of scrub. I could circulate them, but I couldn't always scrub them. And so sometimes our board runner, who was an incredibly experienced person who could scrub, sometimes we just flop and I'd have to go run the board and she'd go scrub. But yeah, you're right. Somebody was always at the board, which meant the secretary was my lifeline constantly. Hey, what do I need to do? And so those secretaries, they are phenomenal. So just appreciate your medical receptionists and your secretaries that are up at the board, but also seeing the behind the scenes of why it's so important that our charge nurses are at that desk, why they are accessible, why they are able to be reached, so that they can handle all of those things that those of us who are in the room all the time don't see. We don't see the calls for cases being added on. We don't see the calls about broken equipment or things that are coming in, all of the myriad of issues that you are juggling. Those of us in the room don't always see those. And we have to have that point person up there who is, either putting out all the fires or coordinating all of the chaos, however you want to put it. But
I always said that they're just seeing out their own people. They can't see the whole world outside their door.
Exactly. And the charge nurse is the one seeing the whole world and seeing everything that's going on.
Really keep that global perspective. In an OR that's really large, for example, I might have someone who comes to relieve me for my 30-minute lunch break. And then in the time that I've gone, some moves have been made. My whole plan's disrupted. Now the whole schedule's off track. And so, it's I don't even like to leave if I can. Or if I do leave, I have here's what we're going to do if this happens. This we're going to do this, or if this surgeon asks for another room, he can't have it because he's slow. But, I mean,
Say no.
I always try to leave with a very comprehensive plan in place, but
Yeah.
you never know what's going to happen if you're away from the board. And, just
Yeah.
a few small, what might seem like small moves has disrupted the entire day. And now I have a team who's stuck here, till 7, 8, 9 o'clock because we've disrupted the whole flow of the day. And so every piece has to fall perfectly into place.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so let's talk about how you learned to do this job, because we're talking about all the pieces and all of the things that have to just fall perfectly into place for the day to go smoothly, but you didn't start this job knowing how to do it. And so I'm curious, because there are many charge nurses out there who just fell into the role and never got any training. They just had to figure it out. But there are nurses who did experience a really good training process. So I'm curious for each of you. Lisa, why don't you start us off, and y'all can just chime in with your own experiences too. But I'm curious what your training was like to become a charge nurse.
Okay, let's twofold. When I very first became a charge nurse was in the level 1 trauma center, and I came from the ambulatory center there within that system, and I just missed the trauma, and so I came back, and it was supposed to be in a staff nurse role, and so for some reason, the charge nurse that was running the desk, this was an evening shift. The charge nurse that was running the desk kept having me come up and give her lunch and showing me all these things and what am I supposed to be doing? And it was like, okay, why are you telling me all this? And then
oh, you know why she was telling you all that.
She went off on vacation, and then next thing I know, she's retiring, and it's like nobody else wants to get up here and do this, and I can't just let it go undone. Right. And so, I think I have my conscience right here. So I did the work for several months, and I decided I probably need to just go ahead and take the role. Yeah. So I did get trained, but it was kind of obscure at the same
very
time.
Subtle training. You didn't know what you were getting yourself into.
Yes. In my current role in the ASC, I knew what I was getting myself into. I could see it, performed when the position became vacant. And so I still needed some training. I needed to learn, different avenues of acquiring information. I found myself being called to rooms all the time. And so it was, again, not the same scenario, but people were relying on me for information, and it just kind of felt natural. So there's two different scenarios there.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
That's kind of how I came about.
Yeah. And what about you two? I don't care. Somebody go first.
Well, me, like I said, I got trained to be a charge nurse on the floor. It was extensive. I worked alongside somebody. She showed me how to do everything, how to do the assignments, how to do everything. But the OR was a little bit different. I'm kind of, it was similar to what she just said. It's like it's a little piece at a time. Like I remember we had a medical receptionist that kind of worked with us too, that kind of helped run the board when I first came to the OR. It was different. We had like I said, we have cis ORs, and we had anesthesiologists at the time that actually ran everything. And so she would work along with him, and then the board wanted to try to run everything. And so she was getting ready to take vacation. And so she's like, well, somebody has to do the billing. And everybody looked around, and I was the junior person. And she said, well, I'm going to start showing you how to do the billing. And so I started little by little. She'll give me like 2 or 3 to do a day. And I said, okay. And then next thing I know, I'm doing all the billing for the 30 or 40 odd cases that we did for the day. And so I think maybe like 2 or 3 weeks later, she told me that she was retiring. And I was like, okay, so I started doing that.
Trend.
Yes. And then sooner or later, the charge nurse, she's kind of started making, she said, why don't you run the board today? And I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I would go and manage the board while she went to lunch. And kind of like he said, by the time she comes back, I messed everything up. And she said, don't worry about it, because this is small OR. She said, hey, you can make the best made plans. But she said, but things always change, because we're at a small hospital. We had, at the time, we had like 4 GYNs. We had like cisgeneral surgeons, and everybody was always popping in, hey, I want to add a case. I want to add a case. Today's not my day, but I want to add this case. And things were always going on like
famous
that. And
words.
so we were always trying to work things out. And like I said, I had no idea really what I was doing. I was just experimenting. And then we got a new director. And when the new director came in, there were like 5 of us that had been there for a while. And she said, hey, why don't we do this? What we're going to do is each one of you going to take a week and you're going to run the board that whole week. There's no backing down. She said, no matter what happens, there's no doing anything wrong. She says, if you do something incorrectly, she said, I correct you. I help you out. And so once that week was over, everybody said, I'm not doing it anymore. But I was crazy enough to say, hey, I'll continue doing it. And that's kind of how I got like I said. So yeah, and so I kind of got stuck doing it. But she, like I said, she kind of guided me along. But at the same time, there's a lot of things that I had to learn on my own. I had to, I got chewed out a lot by the doctors, by the anesthesiologists, because of the way I would do things. And, they're most important, I think, are my people that I work with. I mean, my patients are important, but the people I work with, a lot of times they're looking at, hey, let's go. But you have to pause sometimes to give people a break. You have to know your crew. And I try to know everybody and try to learn them, even on a personal level. Hey, what's your family life like? And so I think that kind of helped me a lot. Like I said, I didn't really get any training per se, but in a way I did, but I didn't. But learning to manage things, like I said, it was just trial and error for the most part.
Kind of a lot of it, even if you are trained, a lot of it just comes as you do it, because there's so many different situations you run into, and that you can't always experience them all in an orientation period, and you just kind of have to just learn as you go. But if you had a director who was there to support you, who was like, you're not going to mess it up, I'm going to help you if you don't know something, then at least you had that safety net that said, okay, I can learn, I can do this, I can be empowered to make decisions, and he or she's going to help me if I don't know what I'm doing. So that's a good footing to at least have, even if you're not necessarily in a full orientation program. And then Academic Medical Center, I'm sure, has an orientation program for their charge nurses and all these things you have to do and check off sheets. So I'm curious if I'm right for you like that, or what you experienced when you were training.
So I mean, I think my training, I think, started a long time ago at my first hospital. Because I had done, work similar to this before, just on a much smaller scale. We had in-house OR supervisors that would work in-house for 24 hours, and I was young and I wanted 24 hours of overtime. So I was like, yeah, I'll learn how to do that.
Sure, why not?
You kind of learn how to manage patient flow and case placement and, all of the small things that might pop up doing that. That was kind of a trial by fire kind of situation. But, I had also done some management with cardiac and led that team. And, in most places, cardiac is somewhat self-contained. And so we managed our own case placement, figured out resources and staffing for that. And so the nurse who's actually my manager now reached out to me and said, hey, you have the brain that you need to do this. You think the way that you need to think to do this job. I would really like it if you would consider applying for it. And I was like, oh, I don't know. And, in my mind, I thought, I really only have very focused cardiac experience. I have a little bit of experience here and there and other things. I've done some plastic stuff. I can do a belly case. But I think I've held the retractor on a total knee twice in my entire life.
Ortho.
I think I closed a hip one time, floating over. So I mean, my experience in other areas is very limited. And so going into the job, the misconception that I had was that you needed to be a clinical expert in all of these different areas. But at a large academic medical center like I'm at, really no one's a clinical expert in all of the areas.
Yep.
That's what I started to learn is that, none of these other board charge nurses know everything there is to know about all of these service lines. And so, I think the thing that I learned from a clinical perspective in my training was that you really have to learn to rely on your frontline leaders who are the clinical experts.
100%.
Service lines.
Oh, yeah.
But, I think that the charge nurse that I trained with was very good about teaching me, the technicalities of, this is how we board a case. These are the rules. These are the policies. These are how we place the cases. This is how we figure out where we're going to put these level 1s and level 2s and level 3s. This is how we work with UNOS and look up donor information and board transplants and get all of the organs lined up. And so, I think that in this role, I had a lot of great teachers who taught me all of the tools in the toolbox. The challenge every day is figuring out what tools to use when and how to use them, in what situations. And I think I'm in training every day, because every day something new pops up I've never heard of before in my life. So then I'm reaching out to people who have been there longer than I have.
Yeah.
I'm talking to my anesthesia in charge person to see what he or she might think. And so, there's a lot of teamwork and problem solving that goes on in that command center too, when those situations arise that you just think, what? I mean, this is insane, Right. So it's a training every day, but I did have some really great teachers who taught me, like I said, the tools that were in the toolbox.
That's excellent perspective. And all of you have hit on it in one way, shape, or form, talking about you don't have to be the expert in the entire OR to end up being the person in charge. Yes, you're steering the ship. Yes, you're the charge person, but you have to know who your resources are. There are your experts in your service line coordinators or in your different nurses and surgical techs who have been doing that particular service for all their career or whatever the case may be. And so it's a self-limiting mindset to think, oh, I can't be the charge nurse. I can't be in charge because I've not done every single service or I don't know everything. When really, like you said, if you have the leadership ability, if you have the mindset that thinks in those terms of moving cases and all of the different things you have to think about when you're running the board or you're the charge nurse, you can get that other information. You have your team leaders, your service line coordinators, your other experts, your receptionist that's sitting next to you. Like, you have access to people who can help you move through. I will say, funny story on my own end, a lot of things you kind of learn on the fly. Like, I learned you don't open a room for a surgeon and give them a second room until you talk to anesthesia after I opened a room for a surgeon and didn't ask anesthesia first. So I'm just saying, there are times we learn trial by fire or trial by yelling. And so it happens. We all make mistakes and we learn. I'm like, oh, never doing that again. So definitely we do have those things that we just kind of learn, oops, and move on. Thankfully that was all it was, but still, I will never forget that experience.
I think probably my best piece of advice for any nurse, any nurse leader, really just any human in general, is say when you don't know something, right?
Exactly. Right.
I'm always the first to say, I don't know, but I can find out. Let me call you back in 5 minutes. Let me figure out what the answer is for you, but I don't know. And I didn't know that like early on in my career. And I think a lot of us kind of fall into that trap. You want them to have confidence in you. You want to instill trust. But when you don't admit what you don't know, you're doing the opposite. You're breaking those relationships. You're telling them one thing, they're finding out another. And so, you can't ever be ashamed to say, I don't know. Because to me, there's a lot more honor and pride in knowing what you don't know than doing something that could potentially really harm a patient.
Absolutely. Carlos, go ahead, Lisa.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I would just add to that too, is don't be afraid when they call you to the room that they're fussing or arguing, just they've got a point of contention and you are the person they're wanting to talk to because you are charged. Just realize maybe that you're just the conduit to the source of that anger. And also I found that if you just give them a minute to make them feel heard, and even whether you know the answer or not, that they're heard, and this can be across the board, surgeon, the staff, whoever, your colleague, your peer, if they feel heard, and then you say, well, let me see what I can do. You don't have to own up to knowing all the answers, and you don't have to be able to fix it right then. It's just, if they're heard and they feel like you valued that moment, then I think that says a lot too.
I agree. Carlos.
Yeah, Lisa just hit one of the points I was going to say, that just being heard. If you just go in the room, like she said, and just listen, a lot of times it's not what you do, it's how you kind of address the issue. A lot of times the surgeon know that you can't correct it right then. There's issues that we have with equipment, and we're a small hospital. We only may have one piece of equipment. The surgeon's upset because it's not working. But if you just listen to them, you just stand there and be patient. You're not combative about it. You just genuinely listen. I think that goes a long way. And also, you kind of hit something, Melanie, that I want to mention. You said that you can learn from anyone. That includes your techs. I learned a lot from my techs over the years. My techs and the other nurses, even new nurses that come in, sometimes they know stuff. When Melanie first joined us, people were like, well, who is she?
Y'all didn't like
What
me.
does she know? Yeah.
Y'all didn't like me at all.
Some people were just resistant because they're resistant to change.
I'm a rule follower.
Right. And so once you came in and you started, like I said, once they learned you, it kind of changed things. And like I said, I learned a lot from my techs. And so you learn that sometimes you don't know everything. You can reach out to other people and you can learn from them. The techs knew stuff like about equipment that I never would have known. They, whenever the reps would come in, they would be like, hey, teach me this, teach me that. And so they learned a lot about the equipment. And so there was issues that we would have with the equipment. And I would have experts right there that could actually repair it, because the rep would actually show them, say, hey, look, this is what happened with it. This is all I did. I didn't do anything special. This is it. And so over time, all I did was just store that information. And that's why everybody comes to me now, because some of the techs have retired, they're left, they're moved on. But that does help, just learning to listen to those people that, like I said, they may have a beef, they may have a gripe, they may just want to show you something. Just never realize that, well, I'm the board runner, I know everything. Kind of like we were saying earlier, I never know everything. Sometimes I have to go and depend on other people. And sometimes there's issues that I can't address that I had to depend on my director to fix. So that's pretty much it.
Yeah, you can learn from anybody. Our housekeeper at our facility showed me where some stuff was the other day that I didn't know, but she did. And nobody is in a position to, quote unquote, low or high or whatever else, that they cannot teach us or show us something. And so I think we need to be open to all avenues of learning and all resources that we have available, because everybody has different experience that they bring to the table. And there's value in what everybody has to bring. So we are coming to the end of this conversation much quicker than I would like, but I don't want this to barrel past an hour, and we're already coming up on 48 minutes. So what I would like to do as we end this conversation today is I would like for each of you, we've already had some really good advice and some really good tips for people who are in the charge nurse role or maybe considering the charge nurse role. But I'd like to give you one more turn on the mic, each of you. If there's any other advice, any encouragement, or any other final thoughts you would want to leave other charge nurses with, or anybody considering being a charge nurse, I'd like to give you the opportunity to share that wisdom with anyone who's watching. And I will let, who would like to go first? Because I'm just kind of throwing this one at you. Is anybody who would like to go first?
I'll take it.
Okay, go for it.
All right, I actually got some good advice from our traveler today, Kevin. He said, each day is a new day. So when you're charged, just remember that, because there are going to be some hard days, especially you're doing kind of like what we're doing. There are going to be some hard days. And just remember, every day that you're going to work is a totally different day. You got to learn to put it behind you. Even if you walk in the room and the doctor chews you out, I try to walk away, and 15 minutes later, I don't put it behind me. I have a doctor that chewed me out so bad one day, everybody came over trying to see if I was okay. And later on, about 15 minutes later, he came over and he apologized. He said, hey, I'm so sorry that but I was frustrated. And you seem to understand my frustration, because you sat there and listened. And he said, but I was, wrong for saying what I said. So that's the only thing I can say is just, like I said, remember that each day is a new day.
That's great advice. All right, who's next?
I'll go.
All right.
I just will echo what he just said. Just that you're that conduit when that surgeon feels like, or the staff feels like they need to vent. I've got two mantras. I always have an open door policy. Even if my door can't stay open, if you see me, grab me, and let me hear your problems. If I can help you, I will. And the other one is learn something new every day. I might be a charge nurse, but like we mentioned earlier, I can't know everything. And so I rely on my resources, and whoever or whatever those resources may be, I'm willing to learn. Now, if I'm called into, like what we've been discussing, if I've been called into the surgeon's room and there's something that they need to tell me, and maybe it was something I didn't know. So I need to be willing to let him speak, let him vent, but also be a sponge and learn from that experience as well.
Very good. All right, Andrew, what do you have to add?
I too have one of my favorite mantras that I use a lot is be proactive, not reactive. And I think that applies to whether you're a nurse in a case or you're a nurse leader, or you just find yourself, oh, I'm in charge today because the charge nurse is sick. Whatever the case may be, be proactive instead of reactive. Have a plan in place for worst case scenario. People often will tell me, okay, you overplan. I'm like, you really can't overplan here, right? I had someone tell me the other we always try to set up trauma rooms as the evening kind of approaches, so we are prepared for a level 1 cranie that might come in, or a level 1 XLAP, whatever it might be. And they said, well, I don't really have a plan in place. Okay, well, let's get one because
Let's plan quickly.
if a cranie comes, we're going to do it. So let's know what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. And so, like I said, that really applies to whether you're circulating a case, scrubbing a case, or you're in some sort of leadership role. Be proactive. Don't wait for these bad things to happen. Have some sort of a plan in place so you have some sort of control over the situation. And that's, that is one of the things that has helped me the most throughout my entire career. And then I think it's just really important for you to over communicate instead of under communicate. You're never going to get in trouble or find yourself in a bad situation because you told someone something 2 times instead of 1. You will find yourself in the midst of a crisis because you forgot to communicate this one critical piece of information. One
Been
time.
there, done that. Mm-hmm.
So I would rather tell you 4 times than none. I would rather tell you 4 times than 1 time. And so I really don't think you can communicate too much. And I think, if you keep those things in mind as you go through your day, it really kind of helps to keep your patients safe. And then the last thing I'm going to say, because I have found myself guilty of this on so many occasions, I think like in the OR, we work in such a technical area and it almost feels mechanical at times. And so a lot of times I find myself reorienting myself, not just myself, but also my team, my surgeons, my staff, my frontline leaders, reorienting everybody to the fact that we're talking about a patient here, not a case.
Absolutely.
And that's one of my biggest pet peeves is when, with this case or this case or that case, well, this case is going to be delayed. No, that patient is going to be delayed.
Yeah, that's a person.
That patient who's been NPO since midnight is now going to be delayed for 6 hours. And that's not an insignificant detail, right? Yeah. And so anytime that there are, kind of like tensions run high, people get stressed, people act out, they do things they wouldn't normally do under a normal, calm circumstance. I just reorient everyone to the fact that we're talking about patients, not cases. These are mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, friends, not procedures.
Yeah.
These are humans that we're taking care of every single day, and we're trying to do the best thing we can for each one of them in our OR today. And so you have to have like that global perspective and really prioritize the acuity of these patients and not pay as much attention to, am I going to make this surgeon mad? Or is this person going to be upset if we make this move or if this case gets bumped? Just always try to keep in mind, this is about the patient, not really about anyone else.
I could not agree more or think of a better way to end this conversation. For every day that we go into the operating room, we might have 15 patients that we are going to see through the cases assigned to our room, or our OR might be doing 120 cases, which is 120 people, right? And for every patient that I may have, I might have 10 or 15. Maybe it's only 6 or 7, depending on what I'm doing. But the patient is only going to see me 1 time. My interaction with them is a one-time thing, and it leaves a lasting impression. So remembering that every patient gets that first impression of me the same as every other patient would, so that I am there and present and treating them as that person that they are and not just the total need that we're taking to OR6. It makes a big difference in how we care for our patients and the ways that we are thinking about what we're doing in the operating room. But we are at the end of time, and I really could sit here and talk to you guys for hours on end, because this is a topic that I think is one that we should really talk about more, because the OR charge nurse is a role that I think is underappreciated oftentimes, and people don't really understand everything that goes on at the board or what's running through your head constantly if you are the one carrying that phone or you are the one in charge. So all of you watching today, I want to thank you so much for joining us, for being here and taking the time to listen and learn. If you are currently in a charge nurse role, I hope that you were encouraged hearing the stories of other people who were right there in the trenches with you, that you realize you're not alone. And these are great resources for you, as are any other OR nurses. We love being resources. So find us on LinkedIn or look for us, look for the other OR nurses in your community that you can reach out to and find some support if you are feeling a little overwhelmed or have more questions. If you're considering the charge nurse role, I hope that you've gotten a few tips and a little bit of insight into what this role would be like if it's something that you want to do. And also, if you're just watching and learning and figuring out what in the world it is we're talking about, I hope that the veil has been raised a little bit and you can see just all of the things that are going on, not just in the one room you might be in, but in the entire OR that somebody is having to juggle and keep up with all day long. So before we end this, though, I do have to say, not just to all of you watching, but to the three of you here, especially charge nurses, you don't hear thank you often enough. And I know that it is a difficult and challenging job. So thank you for doing the job that you do every day and coming back to do it again the next day, even when it was maybe a dumpster fire the day before, but you come back and you do the same thing every day and you care for those patients, you care for your staff. And I'm appreciative, and I want to make sure that not only the three of you, but anybody else watching hears somebody say thank you for what you do. It is very much appreciated. So anyway, Lisa, Andrew, Carlos, thank you for joining me, for sharing your expertise and insight on this panel discussion today. It was incredible. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So yeah. And to all of you watching or listening, thank you for tuning in. As always, feel free to send your ideas to us. You can message us on LinkedIn or Facebook, or you can send us an email at info@firstcasemedia.com. We love new topics. We love new ideas. Send them our way, and we might have another panel discussion later talking about something that you sent in. But that is absolutely all the time that we have for today. Thanks so much for watching this episode of First Case.